Welcome to this episode of Conversations in Education, the collective voice of the Guild, the official podcast of the Teachers Guild of New South Wales. I'm Sarah Warby, Counsellor for Advocacy for the Guild, and together we'll be exploring the ideas, people and passions shaping education in our profession and beyond. Today we will be speaking with Petro Papazoglou, Head of Education for Rise and Shine Education. Petro brings extensive experience across classroom teaching, curriculum, leadership and system-level educational strategy. His career spans primary teaching and senior leadership positions focused on strengthening teaching practice, innovation and school improvement. He is deeply passionate about advocating for early childhood education and strengthening the foundations of learning for young children through future-ready innovations and partnerships. Petro, thank you so much for joining us today. Can I please ask you to introduce yourself further and talk to us about what drew you to the profession?
Absolutely, Sarah. Thank you for having me on. Education, as a whole, it's such an honour to be able to, influence the future and be part of, each child's journey, and not just children. The longer I've been in education, the more I realise you become part of the family's journey as well. You build such strong relationships with every stakeholder in that child's education. So what drew me initially was the fact that I was inspired by my own teachers. You go back, I was fortunate enough back in the very early 90s to get a year of preschool in before school. And, I remember those educators from way back then, and then, influenced clearly through primary school to go and study Bachelor of Primary and go through those years in university. And from there, be able to go and find various roles in the primary context. And then over the years, over a couple of decades, it led me to where I am now, working and leading in early childhood.
And that's such a fascinating space to move into, and particularly early childhood education. Why move into that space specifically?
Yeah, I think the opportunity to lead in primary schools and be able to, every year have the intake of those kindergarten children in, through the New South Wales system, and be able to see what skills they're starting school with, and, which areas, you wonder if I had a bit of influence in their earlier years, through those, 0 to 5, what sort of skills would really help them through primary school. Because, through the last decade, so many changes to curriculum and so many changes to expectations, child safety, resilience required, outcomes-based, education. There was a lot of focus on skills that just hasn't been followed through. Skills like problem solving and resilience, independence, curiosity. The preschool system I found when I was taking in those kindergarten enrolments really focused on, basic writing, numeracy, reading as the school readiness skills, and not really the skills of, collaboration and being able to work with others and deal with those hard days and celebrate the good days. So we're having children starting kindergarten at the school I was at. And, families would come to me in the first week and they say, my child's really struggling. They don't have a voice in the playground, or, something as simple as, the teacher is just being too hard with their feedback, because potentially through their early learning journey, none of the educators had ever told them, could you try that again? Or do you think you could do better? So a lot of children start their primary journey without the skills it takes to have resilience and be able to put their best foot forward and be the best version of themselves. They're just often told, that's good enough, next topic, or next journey or next experience. So I think seeing it from a primary school lens and what it truly takes to be school ready in that early learning journey really inspired me to be able to, dig deep and find the skills required to work with preschools and in early learning.
So foundational. And what is an area of practice or research or advocacy that you're most passionate about at the moment?
Yeah, look, at the moment, we have such wonderful teachers working at the organisation I'm currently at Rise and Shine Kindergarten, and such passionate early childhood teachers that put so much effort into lesson preparation, resource preparation, and all the other parts that come to, being an outstanding educator that has a wonderful bond with children, wonderful bond with families, that champions both those children and their education. And I really find that as a collective in education and also families, we underestimate the impact that these educators make for that child in the early years. So much of the child's development, both physically, emotionally, intellectually, happens up to the age of 5. And these educators have such a huge impact. And I really want to advocate for them and the complexity and changes that they've gone through as well, these educators. And, by partnering with the Guild, and being able to have a voice and be a voice for these educators in early childhood, I hope that we can raise the status of what education is in the early years and share exactly how these children are better influenced by having a quality preschool program, a quality early years program that can best prepare them for primary school.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And two, as we've sort of chatted and we've caught up before, uh, what is it that I guess tying into that championing and advocating, and I think it's language is such a powerful thing, and we've talked about how there's the misunderstandings coming from when people talk about it as childcare or playgroup, stuff like that. And how does that sort of sit with your understanding and experience and what it is that people don't realize about the space?
Yeah, I think the labels of to me they're words like daycare and childcare. It takes away from the opportunity for educators in this space to be treated as equals because children have a lot of needs at that age and they need someone who can truly cater to all of those requirements, all those needs, and that's what makes these early childhood teachers such superheroes. They really can cater to every need that a child has developmentally and socially, emotionally, physically, as I mentioned before. And the best part about early childhood is that children don't have bias. They need to unlearn. We've got such an opportunity in those early years to be able to have such great influences on them and, future outcomes. One statistic I read the other day is that, jobs in the future, and we don't know what the future is going to look like. There's that famous quote, the only thing we know about the future is that it will be different. And it was Peter Drucker, I read that quote. But, when we interview children and we ask, what jobs would you like in the future? In the last couple of decades, it hasn't really changed. I think there was a survey of 8 to 12-year-olds and the typicals came up, doctor, lawyer, athlete. But then the only difference to 20 years ago, we're seeing, young people say, I want to be an influencer or a YouTuber. Where are these, opportunities to become an engineer or an astronaut or a scientist? We're not seeing those really come to the fore. And, in early childhood, we have the opportunity to be able to influence those outcomes for children in providing a STEM framework and encouraging children to try something, make a mistake, want to try again, and and learn from it as well. And going back to those interactions that I had with families back in the primary school days, children weren't getting that opportunity to be able to make mistakes, try again, and be asked to try again. Through those early years, and that does influence a teacher in kindergarten marking work and circling something and saying that's wrong, go give it another go, and a child being willing to say I'm willing to take on feedback and have another go at that. Something as simple as a child turning up in the wrong uniform and the teacher saying that's the wrong uniform today. A child has to be able to deal with these experiences and be able to have a voice and speak up, and that can come through quality experiences when they're younger and opportunities to be able to have a voice and speak up. Can I share something with you as well, Sarah, that is quite, so I'm speaking a lot, but
No, that's what we're here for. We want to hear all of these insights because there's so much to take away from, and I know for myself personally, having primarily been in secondary schools and time in primary, but it's so great to hear from you from that early developmental learning phase that we sort of just take for granted just seems to happen, but there's so many things that you're aware of that are shaping and having such an impact on practice.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, something we try and champion at Rise and Shine Kindergarten is the voice of the child and giving the child as many opportunities to be able to speak up both to their peers and to the adults in the room, to their role models in the room. And one insight I'd love to share is, in a preschool, the ratio of educated child is 1 to 10, both in the classroom and out in the playground during mealtime. But if you then move to a primary school context, only a few months later, they've started kindergarten. You might be in a kindergarten with 25, 30 children. And then once you get to the playground, the ratio might be 100 children to one teacher. So when you look at that as, a massive, huge change for that child, a child that hasn't been encouraged to speak up and make mistakes and reflect and improve when they're in those preschool years, they won't have a voice when they're older, and they won't have that confidence to be able to go and approach the teacher and share how they feel and share what concerns they have or share what wins they have. We truly want every child to be able to have a voice and speak up. And, we hope that through our, quality education framework and through our own curriculum that we implement at Rise and Shine, that we can, give every child a voice and give them an opportunity to, there's that saying, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. We shouldn't have, only a few squeaky wheels getting the oil. We should encourage every child to be able to have a voice. And then those that, don't have a voice, or those that don't speak up, we need to identify those children and we need to champion those children as well.
I think that's so important to remember, and so significant to understand that what you're doing and what you're encouraging through the practices and frameworks there is to have that voice that will have an impact right through school. And I'm curious, I think, for early career teachers, teachers that may be new to the profession, just really would love to know some of your insights and practical takeaways that would help people just maybe approach things a little differently, or know that they're having an impact on students. And yeah, what was it that you've been able to develop across your journey that's given you some practical strategies or takeaways, things like that?
Yeah, great question, Sarah. The looking at a classroom and, hands up for the children, trying to respond to a question you might have or contribute to a class discussion. I think sometimes as professionals, we forget to put our hand up for things. I would encourage a young teachers new to the profession, to put their hand up for as many opportunities as possible. Very often it is overwhelming a lot. When you come out of university, you finished all that study, you come into a full-time role. I can remember being a young teacher 20 years ago myself, and suddenly you've got a class of 32 children and it's just you. And all of that, all the prac that you've finished, all of the studies through university, all the opportunities, maybe the casual days in the lead up to getting that block or getting that part-time role, it's all a blur, and you just need to be in the moment and putting your hand up for opportunities, being able to sit in another classroom with another teacher that's more experienced and be willing to take that time to learn from others is huge, because you come up with these little strategies along the way that can help you in those situations. And once you do get, the enormity of having so many children in your care, and all of the administration that goes with it, and being the nurse and being the financial controller when money comes in, there's so much to being an educator and being a teacher. Once you have that all under control, you hope that you've developed skills that you can impart to others, and that lifelong learning that comes from being a teacher, it's a wonderful opportunity when someone comes to you and says, I'd love to learn that from you, or I'd love to learn a strategy from yourself. So I would put my hand up as often as I can when I'm a young teacher, to be able to, ask questions and learn from others and contribute. If there's an opportunity for, a project in your school, definitely put your hand up. And even if you think your impact won't be that great, the conversations you'll be part of and the senior leadership sort of, collegiality and discussions that you'll be privy to will definitely develop you as an educator and as a future leader yourself. And again, leadership is not for everyone. I've got many colleagues, many friends that are happy to, teach and be in the classroom, and that's admirable. I completely admire those teachers that are lifelong teachers. You've got your highly accomplished, your lead teachers as well, that we definitely need to support and keep in the profession, because they are the lifeblood. And, we have a skills shortage in Australia. We need to keep working on all of those opportunities that we can see, to also to invite partners into our schools, invite industry partners into our school and inspire our children to see what can come after that schooling journey. And those experienced teachers have that life experience and can find those opportunities.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And I think what you sort of suggest there is it's such a community of practice. And in considering that, with organisations and being part of schools that are part of community. How is that important to contributing to the profession, and how do you see sort of the connection that you now have with the Teachers Guild being a part of that?
Yeah, look, we need as as in the education community, we need to be a unified profession. From early childhood through primary, secondary, through to tertiary, everyone needs to see themselves as a collective. And that unification, that professional voice that we can achieve through the Teachers Guild, especially, we can share that wisdom with each other, and then we can have a voice to share with with those that are not in education. And like I mentioned, industry partners or even those that didn't think they could have an impact on what's happening in schools. We need to make sure we're fostering collaboration. We need to make sure that we're upholding standards of what it means to be a teacher, especially in Australia, where we're very fortunate to live here. We're very fortunate to be surrounded by ambitious individuals that want the best for their families. And I really think it's been a blessing to be able to be part of the education, brotherhood, sisterhood, and it's vital to avoid opportunities to be diminished as a profession. Can I share my most hated quote, Sarah?
Yeah, of course.
Those who can do, those who can't teach. Have you
Oh,
heard that one before?
yep, many a time. Yep.
Terrible. So, I don't want teaching to be seen as plan B. I would love to see more teachers. And I mentioned before, you've always got those, children wanting to be athletes and doctors and lawyers and influencers, but I'd love to see inspiring teachers out there being championed and celebrated and put up on a pedestal so that more children want to become teachers and influence the future.
Subject matter expert in humans is just as fascinating, isn't it? And considering that too, you're quite a fascinating human. I learned the other day that you're quite the road cyclist. Can you please talk to us about that and sort of tying into that? It's a big job that we do. So, how do you sustain yourself in this profession and with all the work that you do? Because Rise and Shine as well, it's not just one centre, there are multiple centres out there. So, like, how many of those? And yeah, tell me, how do you do it?
Yeah. For context, across the last few schools I've worked at, in the most recent school, there were about, I was the acting principal, there were just over 200 children. And, I've now come to a head of education role where I'm working and mentoring, working with the mentoring directors and educational leaders. And we have, thousands of children, across our services. We've got 15 services currently between New South Wales and Queensland. And, there's future expansion happening into Victoria. So it is a big jump in the responsibilities, but my routines have stayed quite similar. Glad you brought up the road cycling, Sarah. It's I think having a routine, whether it be your yoga, whether it be your walks, whether it be it's something you do in the morning. So my alarm every day is set just before 5 a.m. and whether it be getting up for a walk, whether it be getting up and just doing some light stretching. But most often you'll find me on a bike first thing in the morning. This morning I went out with a few friends and we just went and had coffee by the sea, just to get out, socialize, have a win before the day starts, I think is super important because the days are hard enough, and you need to have a win before the day starts. Sometimes getting out, having something to do in the morning and having a routine you can stick to before the day starts makes those troubles and those challenges throughout the day sort of seem easier. So I definitely recommend everyone to pick up something they can do in the morning before the day starts, something that encourages socializing as well. Having people around you that may not, if you're in education, those around you that may not be in education, you get so many perspectives and views of the world and just challenges that they might be facing outside of what you would know. And sometimes when you hear other people's troubles, sometimes yours don't seem so big, do they?
Yeah.
So, yeah, but, and sometimes more often than not, in a confidential manner, when you share, challenges from your day, sometimes they as well, it goes both ways. They realize the enormity and the, there is a privilege to teaching, but it comes at a huge responsibility as well. So it is good to have that, from a wellbeing point of view, people to bounce off that you see regularly. So, yeah, for my thing, it is road cycling in the morning. I've got an event coming up very soon, a 230-kilometre race in Victoria. So,
Wow, that is such a distance.
Yeah, got to get through that in about 12 hours. So fingers
Oh,
crossed, Sarah.
yeah, no, that's fantastic. And do you get to ever sort of share the cycling with the young ones at the centres? And do you? It's interesting, isn't it? Because you would really see so early on young people that just have these real passions and interests and I know now for me personally, I don't get to see them until we get to the tertiary, but it'd be amazing seeing, it's almost you get to see little snapshots into the future.
Absolutely. Well, we're very fortunate at Rise and Shine. We've got a wing of the business, and part of the education in Rise and Shine is a focus on STEM. And we
Hmm.
actually have Orbit, and Orbit is a wing of our company that is a STEM specific education initiative. We've got a museum, an Orbit STEM museum in Summerhill in Sydney. And through there, we have excursions that our children go on to. And one of the exhibits that I've really been excited to set up is a cycling exhibit where children learn about the gears on the bike. They learn how to change the tyre. We've got a little bike for them to try, and we've hooked up a dynamo, and we've talked about how to generate electricity through friction. And they light up the light on the front of the bike. So yeah, I've definitely put my mark on including cycling, including my love of all things engineering into the education here. But yeah, those regular excursions, that's just one small bit of what these children get to experience at this STEM museum that we have.
It's fantastic. And too, gosh, I'd love to know how other young people, children could experience that. Is there a way that young people that might not necessarily be in the centre be able to experience some of what
Yeah,
your children get to do?
absolutely. So we've got so due to the success of this Orbit Hub, our Orbit Museum, we've had between our centres visiting. There's not much time to share with others, but what we have had is local partner primary schools come and using the facility, and due to that success, we've actually created a mobile Orbit classroom. So last year we worked together with some builders to actually retrofit an RV. So we've got a mobile drivable classroom with a side pop-up panel. So once you walk inside, there's a huge amount of space. And within that mobile classroom, we've got hologram area, robotics area, engineering area. We've got a microscope kit. We've got some live insects inside. We've got some spiny leaf insects, and we've got bearded dragons as well. Internally, outside, there's a construction area with real tools and a telescope that could be used during the daytime. So that there's a lot of exhibits and resources within to inspire the young ones. And we've been driving that around and sharing that with local schools as well. And most recently, we were at the Marrickville Inner West Kids Fest, and we had 550 people through our Orbit mobile shuttle. So it was a huge opportunity to be able to share that with the local community in Marrickville, which is central to a few of our centres in Sydney. And we'd love to share it with more of the community as well, especially as we champion STEM education and those skills I was talking about. Problem solving, curiosity, collaboration, which is Orbit is all about that. Having a STEM focused curriculum and STEM focused program that has a lot of complexities to it, but we can break it down step by step as a project based learning approach. And yeah, we're seeing great outcomes for children in our own centres. And yeah, this year we're hoping through the Guild as well to be able to connect with more schools and be able to share that with more primary schools local to our centres.
It's fantastic. And two, it's sort of helping bust another misconception is that teaching through technology would maybe just be looking at an iPad or a computer. You're encouraging the young people and children to physically and practically engage with all of these elements that are STEM based, and that's really exciting. And have you seen any particular uh, really exciting moments of joy from the students? Is it opening up parents' eyes as well to sort of not pigeonholing what technology can do for little people?
Absolutely. It's so interesting. We believe we are the leaders in STEM education in the early years, and when we have families walk through our centres, and when we have peers, we have other educators walk through, and we have some open nights or professional development. They say there's a lack of screens or iPads around. I said, well, STEM education is not about technology creep. It's not about introducing more into our education. It's a mindset. It's that mindset of being able to explore, fail, try again, willing to learn and share with others what the experience is. And yeah, going back to that, it's not about the technology that you bring in, it's about the way you interact with the resources that you have. I've run a few professional development sessions with teachers over the last decade, and I title it STEM education, but at the same time, STEM education doesn't have to mean technology or screens. STEM education is your approach to being able to take a balloon and take a cup and take a bottle and be able to create some sort of reaction between them. One of those simple bicarb and water. Be able to look at how reactions and chemical reactions can cause an impact to that balloon or to the bottle, and learn why. The question why is so important. Higher order thinking is something that's lacking in our, especially in primary schools and secondary schools. I think a lot of the reason a lot of this curriculum change happened was because it was becoming such content-based rote learning, and we need to really promote that higher order thinking and not always giving a child or a student the answer and letting them discover and search a bit deeper to where the answer lies and what outcome, or, what investigations or what's the word I'm looking for, what realizations they can make. So what conclusions is the word, Sarah. What conclusions can come from just immersing yourself in the learning and seeing it in 5 different ways.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So what is your hope for the future of education? Where do you see, particularly in your area or other areas, where do you see opportunities or excitement or hopes, dreams? Where to next?
I was very excited earlier this year when our Australian of the Year was announced as the space engineer Catherine Bennell-Pegg. And in her acceptance speech, she talked about the future of Australia, the fact that we do have a skills shortage, and we need to start encouraging STEM learning and those STEM topics more frequently in schools and celebrate them the way we get behind sports in Australia, and we celebrate and cheer when someone has a wonderful achievement in the sporting arena. We need to do the same in the science and technology arena. We need to make sure that any young innovators coming through are being celebrated and cheered on, because we do need to make sure that we are innovating constantly. And innovation is hard because with innovation comes challenge, and often when change happens, people say, "Oh, too hard basket." We need to keep being persistent, and through that, early learning really matters. Being able to instill a growth mindset in children from a young age, being able to instill a growth mindset in your teaching staff, being able to realize that learning is not linear. Sometimes we go on tangents, just like we have in our conversation today, that, it's natural and it's great because, in order to reshape the future of education, we need to make minor tweaks. Some people would call it major tweaks. Some people would call it we need a revolution in education, but there are tweaks we can make to the current system that would allow for better outcomes for children, for their learning, for their safety, and most importantly, for their future. We need to encourage that curiosity to thrive, and anyone who, can instill that in children in their care, in students in their care, curious children will have the future to them. The future belongs to the curious, as they say.
So true, so true. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Gosh, we've ranged across so many things, starting from foundations right through to where ultimately through STEM we're seeing Australians of the Year recognised, and it's so much hope and opportunity. And I really hope that people will get to experience at whatever stage they're at, potentially teaching some of the young people that you've had come through your centres, because they really do have so many opportunities in front of them that will enable them to be quite successful, not just in their early learning, but as you say, you've set them up for the journey right through their lifelong learning, which is really powerful. So thank you so much for coming along today and sharing those insights, and really allowing our listeners and our educators to go, oh yeah, early learning, early childhood education, gosh, this is where it's at, this is what we're doing. So really appreciate your time for that today.
Absolutely, Sarah. Yeah, it's not underestimating the impact of early childhood. Any of our colleagues that are in the primary school space, children that are, coming in and starting and transitioning to kindergarten, let's any children that we see that have those skills, that, inquiry learning and, the resilience, the persistence, the collaboration, let's celebrate those children and let's encourage more of that. Those children that, they're still working and they haven't yet achieved those skills, let's really make a focus on getting those future ready skills from kindergarten and being able to, let them thrive as they continue through their schooling journey.
Thank you again. And from here, don't forget to follow the Teachers Guild of New South Wales on social media and join us as we continue to celebrate and advocate for teachers across our profession.